With Sombra's rework, some weird number adjustments, and a lot of reverted buffs, the Season 7 patch has definitely changed things up, but for better or worse, it'll take some time to tell. But right away, we can look at the new tier list for the DPS heroes, some of which have been directly changed in the patch notes, and others who have had some of their biggest synergies nerfed or buffed, taking them up or down a notch in their strength. Even though some heroes are definitely worse, you can still get a lot of value if you learn how to play them to the fullest. So make sure to use the link in the description for a GameLeap membership if you want to grind even harder. There are tons of courses and guides all available across all roles, and even for improving your mindset for the game, which is definitely key in focusing on just winning, and also for taking advantage of the new patch. Take a look if you're interested, and let's get right into the bottom of the tier list. The F tier is definitely more populated this season, but Reaper is still at the bottom. It's also still really worth mentioning that both the changes to Sombra and Ramatra make it a lot easier for Reaper to work, so overall, the bottom line for the damage hero you pick has been raised, since a lot more styles are viable now, not just bunker and sniper comps dominating the pack. Reaper still struggles in his brawl comps and ranked though, often being able to only do 5,000 damage per 10 minutes in the more long range maps, which happen to be most payload maps and all push maps. Reaper does still have the new Ramatra to pressure, but you'll only be able to get wins off of tank players who are too stubborn to swap, since Orisa and even Sigma can easily stave off Reaper's engage, leaving him out in the open forced to fall back almost instantly. If you want to make him work, you'll definitely have to sweat for it, but luckily it's still possible. Next up, but also in F tier, is Pharah, who still can't catch a break with how strong Iliadi is against her. A secondary fire healing nerf has no effect on her ability to pressure the Pharah into almost complete submission, and Sombra's presence in the meta will also make Mercy that much harder to play. One hack and the new virus on her is quick work. Not to mention Pharah herself struggling into Sombra, especially that Sombra cannot easily commit to the frontline fight when the Pharah looks so aggressively push. Sombra aside, Pharah still doesn't have a good matchup into most other DPS and supports, but as for tanks, she is still relatively untouched except for D.Va, so she's not always the worst when the enemy team isn't focused on countering you or has a more friendly composition focused on fighting the brawl on the ground. Pharah can still work more or less as a counter in that way, but without a Mercy, she's still as weak as ever. To round off the F tier, the other explosion spammer Junkrat joins the failures at the bottom, not really able to contest against the more hardy long ranger Sigma compared to Orisa. He's got his weaknesses on open maps, but on closer range maps, even on King's Row, he can actually pop off quite a bit. But it's no surprise that he's not gotten better, since damage mitigation from tanks is at an all-time high, and even burst heal is as well, making Junkrat a pretty ineffective spam hero since he's unable to really pressure a kill at long range, having to get up close and personal to do so instead. And even though the closer he gets, the more potential he has, he's pretty slow on the flank, and also pretty loud, meaning unless you've got a corner you're hiding on waiting for someone to walk by, forcing the flank and getting a pick with your one-shot combo is going to be pretty difficult to achieve. One step up to D tier, Widowmaker is still pretty low, but as we all know, in the right hands, she has insane potential. If you look at heroes through the lens of how good they would be if you did miss a shot, Widowmaker is one of the best, but funnily enough, she can actually be countered by the right team composition, compared to cheaters on heroes like Soldier 76 and Cassidy. But as the game gets a lot more fast-paced and with Sombra recovered from her slump, Widowmaker gets run over pretty easily, and really requires long-range maps with static objectives, which aren't pretty common right now, especially with the addition of push and flashpoint to Overwatch 2. Mechanics are one thing, but even Widowmaker can't skip a dive from two people without massive help from her team. Next in D tier is Mei, who still can't escape the depths of mediocrity. Her deep chill passive didn't help her at all, and she's simply been changed back to normal, how she was before Blizzard tried out the new passive to switch things up for her. She still suffers from more ineffective utility in her Ice Wall and Blizzard Freeze, since Bastion, Torbjorn, and Symmetra, among other high damage DPS, make quick work of her wall, and heroes like Kiriko and Lifeweaver can easily save players caught in her ultimate. The primary fire spray damage being better again is definitely a saving grace for her, but unfortunately the rest of the damage cast is doing way better, and she's still left in the dust. Sometimes it's good that she's not strong, but it's definitely feeling like even the faster comps are just all about doing insane damage, rather than strategically rotating towards the enemy and trying to catch them with utility. Mei simply can't keep up and remains pretty low on the tier list. Now for C tier, which still has some really good heroes in it. From now on, almost every hero is viable in most situations, but some heroes are more equal than others. Starting off, we've got Hanzo, who's a pretty good jump away from Mei in his viability in the majority of matchups and maps. As a spammy hero with a one-shot, he's got more potential than Widowmaker, and his ultimate even combos pretty well with some of the other big fat zone deniers like Sigma's Gravitic Flux and Iliadi's Captive Sun. His Sonic Arrow is always good, and he even has burst for tanks with the Storm Arrows, besides just simply shooting them in the head. He's one of the weaker heroes to dives, but in the right hands he can be pretty flexible, but he's being played less on the sniper maps where he used to dominate in favor of more consistent spammers. A lot of the double sniper synergy relies on Widowmaker being able to do her job, and Hanzo's Sonic Arrow was perfect to help her with that, but with Widowmaker being a lot less viable, Hanzo unfortunately suffers a bit of the same fate, but he still leagues ahead of the other heroes below him for sure. Next up is Echo, who's got fewer weaknesses than Hanzo, even if they're both super viable. Cutting right to the chase, Echo's mobility, burst damage, and poke are all great, but two things keep her from being more all-around dominant. The first being Iliadi still being the #1 anti-air war machine, and the other is that Ramatra and Doomfist, two strong tanks, with their latest update to their block are a lot more resistant to her burst potential, meaning 2 more tanks that she can't reliably blow up or at least pressure back. Her danger as a hero is pretty important, since an echo that is easily forced out will find herself just poking for sneeze level damage far out of the fight. Not ideal for the hero who wants to get close for assassinations every time she has her focusing beam. Now onto B tier, which is chock full of heroes who are pretty much on the same level of being generally consistent damage dealers while still having their own niche that they can use to get the edge in situations where they're not as good, or even have their own ways to counter some of the more popular forms of play. And first off is Tracer, who's a lot better with a good Sombra to get the dive started. Tracer's still got a lot of ground to cover to get past the bulky backlines and the damage reducing behemoths that are most of the tanks right now, but she's always a great pick for players wanting to get better in a linear way. Poke and prod, rotate to your ideal position, execute backline, and contest point. She's got a lot of flexibility, so she's always got ways to get value. She would be higher up this season if not for tragically the goofiest Cassidy buff to hit the main server, who's up right next in B tier. Cassidy's 75% damage reduction on his roll is pretty crazy, and even though his effective range is slightly reduced, he's got plenty of short to mid-range angles on most maps to play for, not always being forced to contest players playing from 30 meters away. Tracer literally has such a rough time with the Cassidy, and even Sombra does too, making him a pretty good counter pick, but into most tanks he's pretty easy to kill, having to be further up to get his value and being a lot more susceptible to being cut off by his team and collapsed on by any aggressive tank player. His Deadeye has gotten a lot better over the years, but it's definitely one of the weaker ultimates just because of how many options you have to counter it, and how without a Lucio, its effective zoning isn't even that strong. He'll be a good pick to counter Sombra, but he can definitely still die to her if he's not careful. Next up is Ashe, almost right in the middle, as a solid all-rounder. She's got a great kit with her mobility, burst damage, long-range damage, and her recent reload change has made her raw spam output pretty good as well. She's even got the area of effect dynamite to punish groups of players as well. The two things that rein her in a bit though is that her coach gun is one of the slower escape tools in the game, and against a vicious duo of divers it often won't be fast enough to help her escape even a basic 3-2-1 shoot enemy type push. Bob is also in a tough spot. While he can get some pretty good instant value from his uppercut, there's just a lot of heroes right now that absolutely delete him with their headshot potential, so he doesn't stick around for too long. She's a reliable hero, but not too strong, pretty much in a fair and balanced spot just like she has been for the past couple seasons. For a bit of a jump in concentrated firepower, Symmetra is next, being pretty much the queen of brawl compositions, helping them move around and dealing insane ramped up damage when the engage blows up. Her ultimate is also one of the best engagement tools to help you clutch even your most difficult fights, but with Sombra's EMP being basically the one tool that really completely stops it, on top of punishes the aggressive play, a lot of her photon barriers will straight up just go down the drain. Her close range damage is still unbelievably consistent, and with more brawl heroes being viable, she's definitely going to follow them and even lead them sometimes into more wins, even on maps where the composition normally isn't that good. And at the top of B tier is Genji, who's still another great flexible pick against the high damage meta, only really being taken down a tier because of Sombra's newfound second wind. Genji does have good synergy with Sombra, but equally has one of the worst matchups into her as well, since he really relies on his passive mobility and deflect to stay alive when under pressure. With Sombra taking that away from him, he's forced to play a lot more passively, making it rough for a lot of games. He's still a sleeper pick, even if he seems really counterable, and can clutch up a lot of games and is one of the most consistently valuable heroes across all ranks, scaling in how skillful the players are. Keep an eye on Sombra to not get caught and you should be fine, but the more cringe comps will definitely make it really difficult to win. Now for A tier, starting off with the newly nerfed Torbjorn, receiving a fire rate nerf and an overload nerf. But even with 2 nerfs, he's still holding on to a top position, being a generally easy hero to get into and still having really easy spam damage and durability. His turret is also yet another structure for divers to deal with, and with Sombra back in action, it's a pretty strong ability to deter her engages. His fire rate is actually still better than it was before his initial buff in Season 6, so his choke spamming has still been improved, but he won't be getting as many insane double taps as he was before by just holding mouse 1 on a clump of enemies. His overload nerf is small but effective, and while it's impactful in many situations where multiple people are focusing the Torb, it's still enough health in the 1v1 to keep him up and firing back. In his still pretty spammy meta, he's in a good spot, but better range DPS are really starting to outpace him, and Sombra's return doesn't necessarily make him a must pick to beat her either. And next up is the hero we've all been waiting for, Sombra. Her rework has come in pretty nicely, with a much stronger neutral and a more flexible than anticipated translocator to keep her still as slippery as before. She's got a lot more skill expression to her now as well, needing to hit her virus so when players start to really get used to it, she'll become even better than she currently is. She's in a spot where the only place she can go is up, at least until the mid-season patch that might try to change more things than this one did. But this rework has definitely done some good shaking up. Her EMP is unfortunately a lot weaker, but it's probably a good design choice because a strong neutral, consistent damage and mobility along with her ever dangerous hack with ability lockout could really become too overwhelming with a consistent nuclear option for an ultimate. Having the ultimate much less often and it being less effective, but still great for one-shotting target with almost no way to counterplay it when set up correctly, is a good place to be. She'll get a lot better with the season, so make sure to keep trying her out to help add to her strength as more people play better as her and with her to maximize her potential. At the top of A tier is the still consistent Soldier 76. He's still got it, with solid range damage, his still freshly upgraded heal station, and the classic sprint mobility that's still flexible 7 years into the game. He's well-rounded, and his weaknesses are really difficult to point out. He does have a bit of a sore spot when it comes to Sombra, Sombra, getting his legs hacked so he's too feeble to run away. But he's still quite difficult to pin down, ironically even more so when he's on the flank and alone. His quick rotations help him get into the flank super fast and are pretty difficult to prepare for and punish unless you're trying super hard to deal with him and only him. Since his team can usually do just fine without him in the main angle, he's a great option for wanting to play on deep off angles away from your team without having to literally play a mobile flank DPS like Genji or Tracer. His ultimate has some ways to go, but is at least as good as Dragon Blade when used on the flank. Sometimes best used to force attention and cooldowns to win the fight off of something else later. But even if his ultimate isn't the best, he's still pretty good combined with some of the newer and stronger heroes right now, with Kiriko's Kitsune Rush or even Iliari's Captive Sun, landing enough confirmed damage to activate the effect easily. But with Ramatra back in the mix, there's one hero who outshines him in truly taking advantage of a newer meta, and that's Sojourn in S tier. Her rail shots are a great addition to the higher value of Focus Fire with Sombra's Virus and Hack, and her own mobility helps her to avoid becoming a target herself, being able to quickly dash away to save her own skin. Overclock is still one of the better ultimates right now, especially for DPS. It is a great example of an already strong ultimate that can be made better with aim practice, since every headshot is devastating. The reason she's having a better handling of the meta than others is also thanks to the aforementioned Ramatra. Ram has a rough time pinning Sojourn down, and she builds just the same amount of railgun charge on his block as any other hero she shoots, allowing her to easily farm her rail and throw out frequent shots looking for picks almost all the time. She's able to do this against Orisa as well, but she has a double value of stopping the Ramatra from being able to do anything while she's doing it as well, since her primary fire damage is pretty respectable when she doesn't miss against the massive Nemesis form hitbox. She's only beat out by the one hero, as some of you may have already noticed in your games, that's still firmly in control of the DPS meta. At the top of the top, it's Bastion. Again. Yeah, he's still an insane pick with his still unbelievably powerful turret form. It's a wonder he wasn't meta for the entirety of Overwatch 2 so far, with the 20% damage resistance and a whopping 360 DPS he's got when he pops the wheels up. Not only does Bastion still have a foothold on his own, but the heroes he synergizes with, like Iliari, Orisa, and even Sigma, are also not budging. Not even when Sombra's knocking on the door like the Grim Reaper. He's gonna be good for a while too, because he melts every tank in the game, and I really mean every tank. Both he and Sombra can work together to make every tank player's hopes and dreams crumble before their eyes, but he's much more consistent and benefits a lot more from his team to maintain the status quo of the sit back and shoot enemy style that's tried and true. We'll need more than Roadhog reworks to dethrone him, but that's it for now with the damage tier list for the start of Season 7. Stay tuned for the upcoming support tier list, and I'll see you next time.